Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Conscious Love Show podcast. Shane Kohler here. As always, pleasure to be on with you today and looking forward to jumping in to today's episode. Today, we are talking about healing heartbreak and becoming more secure than you were before. And this is a powerful topic. You know, it's maybe not the most joyful topic. I mean, I think there actually is joy here, and we're gonna touch on how we find joy in heartbreak. But I love this topic because, you know, heartbreak is a fundamental piece of the human experience. And in this context, we're largely talking about if you're losing a relationship, right? And so many of us are going through some kind of separation right now. If you're separating from somebody that you loved or somebody that you had a relationship with, and you're learning, you know, you were with this person every day and they were a part of your life, and, you know, you were used to calling them and texting them and spending time with them. And, you know, they were such an integral part of your life. And now you're getting up in the morning and they're no longer there, and you can't call them or reach out to them in the way that you used to. And you're learning to navigate that change in your life, right? You're learning to navigate that separation, and how do you live life without this person, right? Or sometimes we're navigating the loss of a loved one, right? Maybe to death or in some other way, but sometimes we're navigating that loss. And that can be such a painful experience. You know, I remember I was thinking about it this morning when my grandmother died. I was 11 years old, and it was like my whole life, my grandma had been there, and she was like my favorite person in the world. And then just one day she was gone, and trying to resolve the existential dilemma of how is somebody who has been there as long as I've been alive just no longer there. Right. And we feel that way a lot of times when we lose a relationship, right? For the last 5 years or for the last 10 years or for the last however many years, this person has been there and now they're just no longer there. And there are even smaller heartbreaks, right? Sometimes we meet someone and there's an electric kind of connection and we feel amazing. We feel like I've never met anybody like this, or I've never felt like this about somebody before. And, you know, we feel so sure that this relationship is going to work out, so sure that this relationship is going to be the one. And then, you know, a few months in or maybe a year in, we realize that, you know, it's not everything I thought it was, or the way that I felt about this person in the beginning wasn't necessarily a representation of how compatible we truly were in the long term. And, you know, so many of us have gone through all these different experiences, right? We've gone through all these different experiences, and heartbreak is fundamental to the human experience. I don't think there's a single person on this planet who will not have their heart broken at least once. Most of us more than once. Right. And I look back at my life and there have been several significant heartbreaks, right? You know, at first I think was, as I said, when my grandma died when I was 11 years old. And, you know, when I was 16 years old, my high school sweetheart, who the first person I ever fell in love with, you know, she dumped me and cheated on me and then blindsided me with it and you know, like mocked me. I mean, it was tragic, right? It was awful. And, in my 20s, I had a pretty devastating heartbreak when I fell in love with this married woman. And then, she didn't completely ghost me, but like kind of ghosted me, right? About a month into our relationship, she just, it was very sudden and she withdrew and just completely cut me off. And it was like, it was devastating for me for, a few reasons. And, we all go through these like really intense heartbreak experiences at certain points in our lives. And they're they're painful. Of course, they're painful. And there's a process of grief. And today I want to talk a little bit about the process of grief and how to move through the process of grief, right? And many of us have heard there are like 5 stages to grief, right? There's denial and bargaining and anger and depression. And then ultimately, when we resolve it, we move into acceptance, right? And so there are all these kind of stages we've got to go through as we grieve a loss of someone or something in our lives. And I want to say not only is heartbreak painful, but it's also transformative. And this is something that I think we've never really been taught about heartbreak, right? We've never been taught how it catalyzes a transformation inside of us. All the love songs and everything we see in the movies and everything, it's always tragic, right? It's always horrible. And like it does feel that way for a time. Right? It does feel tragic. It does feel painful. And for anyone who's going through a heartbreak right now, whether you're grieving a loss of someone to death, or whether you're grieving a relationship that's ended, or any form of heartbreak that you might be going through, I don't want to diminish or, devalue the pain of the experience you're having right now. I don't want to be insensitive to that in any way. I don't, I want to honor that, because like we do need to honor that. We do need to honor the vulnerability and the humanity of, grieving that loss and going through that pain. And yet while I don't want to diminish that in any way, I don't want to facilitate you getting lost in it either. Right. And so as we go through a heartbreaking experience, our challenge is to remain conscious as we go through it, to remain aware as we go through it, right? To not get lost in it. But if you imagine, maybe we could relate it to like being in the water, right? And you're kind of floating in this water of heartbreak. Well, try to keep your head above the water. Right? You're still in the water. You're still feeling the water moving through you. You're still getting tossed around by it a little bit, but try to keep your head above the water, right? Try not to drown in the heartbreak. And I know that's difficult, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But if you can keep your head above the water, you can move through this experience consciously. And whether this is, a marriage of 20 years that's falling apart, whether it's the death of a loved one, whether it's a relationship that you've been in for a month or two, and you're feeling heartbroken about that, because I've noticed this, I've been in a relationship for a year and ended it and felt clear about ending it and been able to move on without really feeling that heartbroken. And then I've been in certain relationships for a month that were really intense, and like the heartbreak lasted for a year after a month-long relationship. So it's not even about the amount of time that you're with the person. It's not even about the exact specifics of the situation, but it's about the way that you attach to it. And sometimes the suddenness of it can be what causes the heartbreak. Like sometimes, if you've been with someone for a year and the relationship has been slowly falling apart over several months without even realizing it, you're kind of grieving that relationship before it even ends. So by the time you get to the end of it, it doesn't hurt so bad because you've been grieving it little by little all along. But sometimes when you've been with someone for a month and it was a really great month, or you got very attached to a person in a month, and then it was just suddenly cut off, and there's so much that you felt was unresolved, or so much you were dreaming about, like you had a vision of where it could go and what it could be and what it could become, and you were dreaming about it and you were excited about it, and then you just had that dream suddenly ripped away in an instant. Like that can be incredibly painful. And so it's not about exactly who the person was or what the relationship was like or how long you were together. I think every situation is so unique. And what it's really about is, regardless of the specifics of the situation, it's about being present to what you're experiencing. Right. And as I said, if you're in the water of heartbreak, if you're getting kind of tossed around in the waves, trying to keep your head above the water, right? Trying not to drown in the heartbreak, but to remain conscious as you go through it. And something I wanted to start with in today's conversation is really looking at the fact that most of us don't really understand what heartbreak is on an existential level, right? We kind of misunderstand heartbreak. We think it's about one thing, but it's actually about something else. And if we can't understand what it's really about, we can't really heal from it. And so here's what I mean by that. What I mean is, like, if we take the example of losing a relationship, right? I'll use the example I shared earlier. When I was in my 20s, I was dating this married woman, which I don't recommend, by the way, but it never ends well. But it was just where I was in my life, and that's what happened. But I was dating this married woman for about a month. And this was one of the most devastating heartbreaks in my life. Again, it was short, right? It wasn't like, I wouldn't even say, I mean, maybe I fell in love with her to a degree, but like, like, we weren't in love. We didn't have this deep, amazing relationship. You know, but it was intense. And it was like crazy, and it was wild, and it was like emotionally tumultuous, and it happened very fast. And then it was taken away very fast. It was just a very intense experience. And when it ended, I was left reeling for like a year. Right? Like, it was like, I mean, it's crazy to think, like, here's this person that I was with for a month, and then I was heartbroken for like a year after that. But the reason for that, and I think, this was maybe the first time in my life that I learned how to go through heartbreak in a powerful way. Right? I learned how to heal through it rather than reaffirming all of my old wounds through it. But at the beginning, I didn't know that. And I think it was a transformational journey for me, this year of heartbreak around this situation. And in the beginning, what I thought that it was about losing her. Right? I thought, oh, I loved her. Oh, we had so much potential. Oh, we had such an amazing connection. Oh, she's the kind of person that I always wanted to be with, which, by the way, none of this was really true. Right? When I met my wife, and like, I would compare the two, not that I did, but if I were to compare the two, it's like my wife and our relationship is so much better in every way. Right? Like, all this fantasy I had around, oh, she's so amazing and such an amazing relationship. And, oh, I've never met anyone like this, and the best person I could ever hope to be with. And all this drama that I created around it wasn't even true. But that's where I was at the time. And I thought the heartbreak was about losing her. And for anyone who's going through a heartbreak right now, I just want you to pay attention to that. And are you going through this heartbreak feeling like you're heartbroken because you lost someone? And I'd like to suggest that maybe what you really lost wasn't the other person, but maybe what you really lost was yourself. And maybe now what's happening is you're finding yourself again. And that's a painful process. But if we can understand what's happening, and we can understand it for what it is, and not be confused about what it is, not be deluded about what it is, not be misunderstanding what it is, right? But we can recognize, okay, like, what I really lost here was myself. Maybe I lost myself in the relationship. Maybe I lost myself in this person, and that can happen in a month, right? It doesn't need to be 10 years for that to happen. That can happen in a month. Maybe I lost myself in this person. I lost myself in this relationship. And what happened was, in the matter of, maybe it was 10 years, maybe it was a couple years, maybe it was a couple months, right? But whatever it was, in the period of time that I was with this person, I started to identify myself as someone who is in relationship with this person. My identity started to become tied up in, I'm not just me, Shane, my own person, but I am me, this person who's in relationship with another person. And I lost touch with who I am as an individual. And that can feel amazing at times, right? When that person's there, when that person's validating you, when that person is loving you and, telling you how amazing you are and telling you how much they love you and telling you how much they want to be with you, and there's sex and romance and all, like that can feel amazing. But then when that suddenly disappears and your identity became not just you as an individual, but you in relationship with someone else, and now that someone else or that relationship is no longer there, what we're really going through is an existential experience, right? It's like an existential crisis. It's like, who am I? Do I even exist? If my identity was someone in relationship with someone else, and now that someone else in that relationship is no longer there, do I even exist anymore? And a lot of times, that's what's happening for us when we're heartbroken. And I want to say something here. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. Right? I'm not saying like, oh, you should never become attached to anyone and you should never identify with being in a relationship. I'm not saying you should never do that. I think it's natural to do that. To some degree, I don't think we could help doing that. Right? We exist in relationship with other people. And when that relationship ends, a part of us, at least as we knew ourselves, dies. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I'm not saying that it's bad to do that. I'm saying it's what we do. And then when that relationship transitions or changes, a part of us as we knew ourselves dies with that. And so we think, oh, I want this person, I miss this person, I lost this person, and I'm sad because I lost this person. You're not actually sad because you lost this person. You're not actually hurting because you lost this person. You're hurting because you lost the part of yourself that was in relationship with that person. Now, that might sound like an unimportant distinction. You might be like, well, what's the difference? But I think it makes all the difference in the world, because if we can go through this experience being aware of that, and what that does is that brings our power back into ourselves. Because if you're sad because you lost this person, then the only way you can be happy is to get that person back. But some of you may have noticed, how many of you have gone through a breakup, gone through a heartbreak, lost the person, grieved and like craved that person and wanted them back, and then you got them back and it just wasn't the same anymore? If that's ever happened to you, tap that heart a few times. I imagine a lot of you know what I'm talking about when I say that, right? You want this person back so badly. You're so heartbroken because you've lost this person, but then you get them back and it's not even the same anymore. Well, if you were really grieving the loss of that person, then getting them back would have solved the problem. But the reason that getting them back didn't solve the problem is because you have transformed. You are no longer the person that you were when you were with them. And that can even happen in a week. If you're grieving for a week, you might become a completely different person in a week. Thanks for tuning in today. And if you enjoy the Conscious Love Show, there are a few things you can do with just a few seconds of your time that will really support us in being able to continue bringing these messages to you every single week, completely free of charge. The first thing you can do is give us a 5-star rating on one of the major podcast platforms. The two most popular for this show are Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but you can leave a rating on any platform where you listen to this podcast. And if you'd be willing to take just an extra moment, you can write a few words about the show and share with people how it's touched you and the difference it's made in your life. That will go a very long way in supporting our show. Possibly the biggest thing you can do to support the show is share it with someone that you know can benefit from it. If you get a lot out of it, it's very likely that a friend or loved one of yours will too. And I appreciate it so much when people share the show. If you wanted to take the extra step, you could post a link to today's show on your stories or socials and help get the word out in that way. If you'd be willing to take just one of these steps today, I would appreciate that so much. And I want to say thank you in advance for caring about the show and being willing to support it. Thanks again for listening today. Your presence here means everything to me, and I hope you continue joining me each week for many years to come. Lots of love, and let's get back to the show. And that relationship no longer feels the same anymore. And this can be a really kind of scary place to be, because then it's like, okay, well, getting back with them won't fix it. But without them, I'm sad and I'm lonely. And like, you're kind of faced with this reality that you must go on alone. Right? Like, they can't solve your problem anymore. Whatever magic or power they had, it's just not there, because you are no longer the person that you were in that situation. And this is why I say that grief and heartbreak is a transformative experience. It actually transforms us. And so they can't come back and fix it anymore. You're being faced with this situation where you have to go on alone. You have to face life without the person. You have to face your journey as an individual rather than in relationship with this person. And what this really brings up are like existential questions of, who am I? Some of the masters, like master teachers and gurus, that specifically in like Indian traditions, one of the teachings is that the only thing you need to do to become enlightened is to ask the question, who am I? Right? And if you just sit and contemplate that question, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? It leads to a kind of like breaking down of the ego structure. And then you start to have this awareness of like your true nature. Well, heartbreak does that. Heartbreak does that same thing if you go through it consciously. If you go through it consciously, and because you see what happened was you developed this identity, as I was saying earlier, that I'm not just me as an individual, but I am me, I am Shane in relationship with someone else. And now that relationship has ended. And now I am learning who I am without that person, without that relationship. Right? I'm starting to create a new identity. And so what actually happened, I said this earlier, it's like part of you is dying. The part of you who was in relationship with that person is dying. And a new part of you is being born. You're coming into a greater awareness of yourself. And I want to say this, it's not like you lose the part of you that was in relationship with that person. It's that your identity is expanding and becoming bigger than that, right? So you'll always have that part of yourself. You'll always be able to look back and be like, I remember what it was like to be in that relationship. I remember who I was at that time in my life. Like your identity still contains that part, but it's no longer only limited to that part. Right? The construction of who you were at that time in your life is breaking down and falling apart, and you are becoming a bigger version of yourself. I now contain the part of me who was in that relationship and a part of me who's not in it. And I want to talk a little bit about going through this process consciously, as I was saying earlier, going through it with your head above water versus going through it like with your head underwater, right? Because what happens when we go through heartbreak unconsciously is we fall into lower states of consciousness. So we fall into bitterness and resentment and victimization and hate and grudges and judgment and like criticism of ourselves, criticism of others, right? Like some of us, and it's okay if this is you, but if this is you, like you just want to recognize there's a greater possibility for yourself. Like some of us still hate our exes for what they did to us, right? Like some of us still haven't let that go. I can't believe how they treated me. I can't believe what they did. I can't believe they ghosted me. I can't believe that, all of that, right? And we carry that with us. And so when you experience a heartbreak and you don't go through it consciously, rather than your identity getting bigger, as I was saying earlier, rather than you becoming more than you were in that relationship, you become less, right? Like your identity kind of shrinks and you become a smaller, more wounded version of yourself, where it's like in that relationship, you are actually more than you are without it. And so you feel like a victim to it. How could this happen to me? How could they do that to me? How could they not love me? How could they not give me what I needed from them? How could they not care about me? How could they be so cold or so cruel? And look, like experiencing the pain and the fallout of this is normal. I'm not saying that we don't feel that or we don't have those thoughts. But I'm saying at a certain point we need to grow beyond that. And if we don't grow beyond that, it's kind of like we dig our heels in and we become a smaller version of ourselves. And then what happens as we dig our heels in and we become that smaller version of ourselves is two things. One, we look at our past with bitterness and resentment and like holding grudges against our past and the people and the experiences from our past. And then we look at our future with fear. And so we're begrudging the past, we're afraid of the future. And can you see how one is congruent to the other? Right? Like we, as a human being, we exist in time. And so however we feel about our past is also what we're going to think about our future. And so if you've been heartbroken, if you've been let down, like I shared earlier about when I was 16 years old, my high school sweetheart, who was like the first girl I was ever in love with, she like broke up with me and blindsided me and cheated on me. And I mean, it was devastating. Like it was really, really devastating. And I was already kind of on a dark path at that time. And by the way, I don't blame her for breaking up with me. I would have broken up with me too. Right. But I was already kind of on a dark path at that time. Right. I was into drugs and things like that. I was already kind of on a dark path. But when that happened, it was like it solidified my dark path. It was like I just went all the way into it. And it was probably like a good 5 years before my head even came up above water. I mean, like I fell into like severe drug addiction. I ended up going to jail. Like I went through all these things, like because we could say like that relationship was maybe the high point of that time of my life. That was like the high point of that time of my life. It was like maybe we could say like it was the only positive thing in my life. There was nothing else good. And then when I lost that, there was nothing holding me to like any form of goodness in my life. And so I just went all the way into darkness. And it was like years of living in like complete darkness before my head finally came up above water. And part of that happened by getting off drugs and finally getting a fresh perspective on life. But I had to go through a lot to get there. And I'm not saying that everybody who gets heartbroken is going to get hooked on drugs. That was just my journey. But what I'm getting at here was that at that time, and granted, like I didn't have parents who could give me a healthy perspective on this. Like I remember the night I got heartbroken, my dad's like, "You want to smoke some weed?" Like that was all he could offer me. That was all. Like she breaks up with me, and I come home and I tell my dad what happened, and he's like, "Here, smoke some weed," right? Because that was all he could offer me. That was all he knew. Right. So there was no one or nothing in my life that could give me a healthier or more helpful perspective on this. It was just like I was completely lost and I had to go through it. So what did I do? I became resentful. And as I was saying earlier, like we live in time as human beings, right? So however we look at our past is also going to be how we look at our future. And so I was looking at her and I hated her. How could she do this to me? Right? Like I just hated her guts. And then, so hating her and resenting her, then that automatically transitioned to every relationship for my future. So, well, this is what I can expect from women. This is how women are going to be. And so I had these kind of assumptions about how women are. They're dishonest, they're manipulative, that you can't trust them, they don't care, they're selfish. Not true, by the way. I don't like my wife is an amazing woman. She's not any of those things. And a lot I see the comments on a lot of my posts, like a lot of women say these things about men. It's not true about men either. But if you have a past in which you are holding men in contempt and resentment, and you're begrudging the men in your past who have hurt you, then as you look to the future, you're going to have certain assumptions about men. This is how they are. They're liars, they're cheaters, they're manipulative, they're dishonest, they don't care, they treat women like garbage. That's not true about men, but that's your relationship with men based on your past, and you're therefore projecting that into the future and saying this is what men are and this is how men are. And women do that with men and men do that with women. So when we're going through heartbreak, if we try to guard ourselves against the experience, and what this really comes down to when I talk about going through it consciously versus going through it unconsciously. Going through it consciously means to be willing to feel all of it, to be willing to really allow it to like penetrate our heart and our soul. Going through it unconsciously means to guard against it. And so some of the common things you'll see is like, oh, why am I still worried about that? They were an asshole. Like, why am I still even giving them any thought? Like, I should be over this by now. Sometimes we'll just immediately jump into another relationship or go out and just sleep with someone or whatever, right? Just to avoid feeling the pain and the grief of that loss. We'll just go sleep with someone or jump into another relationship or go out partying or drink a lot of alcohol or do a lot of drugs, which is what I did. Or, I mean, there are so many ways of not really allowing ourselves to feel what's happening, right? So many ways of guarding ourselves against it and protecting ourselves. Sometimes we just talk about it endlessly, right? Talking can be therapeutic, but sometimes when we're talking, if you're going through a heartbreak or something and you're just always talking to your friends about it and you're saying, I can't believe they did this. And I can't, and how could they? I'm hurt. Like sometimes we're just reinforcing our limiting beliefs around it by talking about it. Like we're staying in it. Like we're not really allowing it to penetrate. The constant thinking and ruminating and talking about it is keeping us attached to a certain narrative and storyline about it that is having us continuing to see it in a certain way through a certain perspective that is limiting our ability to go deeper into the experience within ourselves. And so all of these things that I'm talking about are ways of experiencing heartbreak unconsciously. And when we do that, as I said earlier, we become smaller than we were in the relationship. It's like the relationship it's like the heartbreak breaks us. And it solidifies our wounding. So if, maybe in childhood or in my past relationships, I had a feeling of like, I'm unworthy or I'm unlovable or I'm not good enough or any version of that, right? These are all ideas of like shame and unworthiness. And we all have this to some degree. This is part of being human. But then if I, to whatever degree I have these ideas of shame and unworthiness, and then I get heartbroken, I get let down, I'm disappointed, I'm disregarded by somebody. And I go through that experience unconsciously. I go through it with resentment and shame, and I fight against it. I resist the experience. I try to control the experience. I hate the person. I dissociate with drugs and alcohol and sex and other kinds of experiences, right? And I don't allow the experience to really penetrate my heart. Then I become smaller and my ideas about shame and unworthiness get bigger. The limiting ideas that I had about myself from my past are actually reinforced. So I believe them more. And if I believe them more, that means I need to protect myself more, which means all my barriers against intimacy, my ability to connect, my judgments about men or women, all of it gets stronger. It gets reinforced. And so some of us are going through life recreating the same kinds of heartbreaking experiences, attracting the same kinds of painful relationships, right? Attracting the same kinds of, disconnected or toxic or painful type relationships. And we're recreating these cycles over and over and over and over again. And the reason we're doing that is because we're not really healing through any of it. We get hurt, and every time we get hurt, it strengthens our defenses. And we get hurt again, and it strengthens our defenses. And none of these experiences are actually penetrating our heart. There's like this age-old life wisdom that all of us have probably heard at some point, where if you don't learn the lesson repeats itself. I think we've all heard that at some point in our lives. And so this is what's happening, right? You're continuing to attract people into your life who break your heart. And the reason you're continuing to attract people in your life who break your heart is because you're not learning from the heartbreak. You're not growing through the heartbreak. You're not becoming more as a result of the heartbreak. Time and time again, you're shrinking down. You're becoming more wounded. You're becoming more hurt. It's reinforcing all your limiting beliefs, all your limiting assumptions about yourself, about other people. And then you go on Instagram and you comment about how, you can't trust anybody and they're all jerks. Just again, spewing your limiting beliefs out there. Because you're not allowing any of your pain to actually penetrate your heart. And this is the thing. Earlier, I spoke about these ideas of shame and unworthiness, right? I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not wanted. There's nothing amazing about me. Nobody would really ever be attracted to me, right? All these kinds of shame ideas. And again, we all have them. These are fundamentally human ideas. This is, we could say in this life that we're living here, it's part of our curriculum. It's part of our journey is to wrestle with these limiting ideas about ourselves. And when you get heartbroken, when somebody ghosts you or you go through a breakup, the temptation is to really buy into these ideas and say, they left me because I'm not good enough. Or if I had been better, they would have wanted this relationship. If I had been more worthy, they would have loved me, but it's because I'm fundamentally unlovable. There's fundamentally something wrong with me, and that's why they left me. And we resist feeling the pain. And the reason we resist feeling the pain is because we're afraid if we really let ourselves experience it, we really let ourselves go into it, we really let it penetrate our hearts fully, then what's going to happen is we're going to see that all of that shame and guilt and unworthiness and not good enough and not lovable and not attractive, we're going to see that it was all true. And that's what, like, we're all so afraid to feel. That's why we have, like, any form of barrier you have against love and intimacy and being seen, any form you have against that, the reason that's there is because on some level, and often it's very unconscious, but on some level, you're afraid that if you were really seen by somebody, that you would be seen as not enough. And our deepest fear, our deepest human fear, is that that is actually a fact of our existence. Our deepest fear is that that is actually true. I've often shared about A Course in Miracles. It's been kind of a foundational study of my life, is the book A Course in Miracles. And in A Course in Miracles, there's a line that talks about how we're so afraid that if we look inside of ourselves, that we will just see evil and darkness and that we will shriek in terror. And it says, but what if you looked inside yourself and you realized that none of that was there? And this is what we're all afraid to do. We're afraid to look inside because we're unconsciously afraid of what we're going to see. We're afraid that if we really look, we're going to see that it's true that we're fundamentally unlovable. And so we avoid it. But what happens to every single person who really looks, and when I say looking, I think the way that we look is through feeling. Right? The way that we look is by really letting our hearts break, letting ourselves be like deeply penetrated to our core, feeling those deep, dark emotions. And what we ultimately find when we really go inside of ourselves, when we really look inside of ourselves, what we ultimately find is it's not true. And the way we experience that it's not true, like not just like a thought, like it's easy to say, oh, I'm worthy, I'm enough, right? Anybody can say that. But the way that we actually experientially realize that is by letting ourselves fall apart, like completely break open. And then realizing that no matter how much I fall apart and break open, I'm still not broken. I'm still not, like, nothing has ever like taken me away from me. I'm still me. I'm still here. I'm still alive. I'm still breathing. And this recognition on an experiential level is one of the most powerful things that you can experience as a human being. And this is the gift that heartbreak is in your life. And I'm going to say, for anyone who's listening today, you are going to be heartbroken again and again and again and again and again until you allow yourself to truly experience this. Because this is the reason that heartbreak is coming into your life. This is what it's here for. This is the gift that it brings. It is here to show you that you cannot truly be broken. No matter how much you might feel like broken wide open at times, you're still you. You're still alive. You're still breathing. You're still intact. Nothing has taken your soul away from you. And this is the experience of security. When we talk about secure attachment, right, for anyone who's familiar with attachment styles, you have anxious, and being anxious is like, always craving more and more and more love. It's never enough. No matter how much I get, it's never enough. You have avoidant, and avoidant is like any amount is too much, right? Like, don't get too close to me because intimacy freaks me out. And then there's disorganized, which is where we kind of vacillate from an anxious experience to an avoidant experience. And then there's secure. And secure is, when we would say we're well adjusted to love and intimacy, and, we can take space, we can take closeness. We're good with all of it, right? We have the ability to navigate all the realms of relationship. This that I'm talking about right here, this ability to be broken wide open, to go to the depths of your soul and realize that you're still intact. This is what security really is. This is how we develop secure attachment. You see, our anxious patterns, our avoidant patterns, our disorganized patterns, they're all ways of tiptoeing around our wounds. Right? If we're anxious, we keep craving and craving and craving more love and attention and validation and connection because we're so afraid of experiencing the absence of it. And so we chase love and chase love and chase love to try to ever avoid experiencing the absence of it. When we're avoidant, we kind of tiptoe around the outside of love and intimacy and closeness, right? We dip our toe in the water, but then we pull back. And we do that because we don't want to feel the discomfort of being close to someone. And what I've noticed with avoidant people is when they do actually let down those avoidant walls, they often become anxious. Because what they were really protecting themselves from the whole time was the desperation for love they feel underneath it. And disorganized is kind of an extreme version of both of those, right? Where we're kind of vacillating from one to the other. When we have the ability to really feel all of it, when I'm not afraid to be close to someone and I'm not afraid to be alone, that's security. And the people who break our hearts are giving us this wonderful gift of the opportunity to become more secure. And there's a kind of integrated intelligence that happens where it's not that you think this. People often say, like, in my mind, I get it, right? Everything you're saying makes sense to me. Intellectually, I understand it. But when I get into a relationship with someone, I still act like a crazy person, right? Well, it's one thing to have an intellectual awareness of something. It's another thing to be deeply integrated and embodied in an experience. And we only become deeply integrated and embodied in an experience by experiencing it fully. And so there's an integrated intelligence that happens in our body when we really allow ourselves to surrender to heartbreak. Right? I'm letting myself feel it fully. But again, I'm keeping my head above water, right? So I'm going through it consciously. And when I say keeping my head above water, it's like I know what I'm feeling. I know why I'm feeling it. I'm not just drowning in the experience, but I'm present and I'm aware of the experience and I'm allowing it to penetrate my heart and I am feeling it fully, but I'm not letting it take me over. I'm like, let me put it this way. I am defining the experience. I am not allowing the experience to define me. Most of us have been defined by our pain in our lives, right? Something hurts me and that pain defines who I am. But when we go through heartbreak consciously, we don't allow the heartbreak to define us. We define it. And so in like meditative teachings, there's often something they talk about as being the observer of the experience. Right? So rather than being enmeshed with the experience where like the experience identifies who I am, right? Which is, most of us, until we do some kind of conscious work, we're very identified with our experiences. We think we are our experiences. In meditative teachings, they talk about being the observer, which is the ability to detach myself from the experience. So I see the experience happening to me, but I see it happening as though I was like a third person, right? Where I can see myself having the experience, but I am not enmeshed with the experience. So it's kind of like that. I can see myself being heartbroken. I can see myself grieving. But I'm stepping back from it and observing the experience from just a little bit of a distance. I'm not dissociated from it. I'm not like, I'm not repressing it. I'm feeling it fully, but I'm watching myself feel it fully. And so maybe I'm just taking deep breaths and maybe I'm crying, right? Maybe I'm releasing the energy from my body through tears. And I'm breathing deeply and I'm present to all the sensations in my body. And I feel this like never ending pit of darkness in my heart. And I'm just letting myself fall into it. But rather than being completely consumed by it, there's a part of me that is stepping back and watching this happen. And what happens as I move through heartbreak consciously is as I said, I'm developing this integrated intelligence where I am learning in an experiential way. It's not a thought, it's not a concept. It's a real life experience. I am learning in an experiential way that I cannot be broken. The result of this is courage. Right? The result of this is courage because as I go forward in my life and maybe I get back on the dating apps or I go out with someone or I open my heart to a new relationship or like whatever I might open myself up to, I am doing it with an integrated awareness that I cannot be broken. The worst thing that could possibly happen in this situation is I feel some pain. And if I feel some pain, I know I can sit with that. I can let myself fall into it. I can move through it in a conscious way. And there's going to be a period of grief where I'm going to move through a period of grief. And then on the other side of that grief, I will still be intact. I will still be whole. In fact, I will have expanded my capacity to be with myself, to be with all of my human experiences. And so there's this incredible courage that starts to develop in me where I no longer need to crave and chase love. I also don't need to avoid it. What heartbreak does is it breaks our heart open to all of the things that we haven't allowed ourselves to feel. All of the things that I was keeping at an arm's length by chasing or avoiding love. It breaks my heart open and it brings it like front and center where I can't ignore it. And again, some of us fight with all our might to just push it down and like, I don't want to feel it. I don't want to deal with it. I'm going to drink it away. I'm going to smoke it away. I'm going to sex it away. I'm going to, just complain and argue and resist and ruminate and fight with it until it goes away. But when we can resist the temptation to do all of that and we can just let ourselves fall into it, it changes our entire relationship with life. And so I just want to quickly, in the last few minutes here, I want to touch on the process of grief. Because I think, we talk about the 5 stages of grief, which are denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and finally acceptance. Right? And so every true grieving process leads to acceptance. I was listening to Eckhart Tolle this morning. Anybody who's read The Power of Now or any of his work, he's brilliant. He appears to be an enlightened being. And I'm not going to argue one way or the other about that, but the man is brilliant. And he shares really deep wisdom. And he said in a talk I was listening to this morning, he said that life is fundamentally hard. Right? Everything in life experiences challenge from a seed sprouting up through the dirt. That's challenging, right? Like that seed has to like push its way up through the dirt and sprout. Right? From like animals in the jungle and like every single life form experiences challenge. It's just the nature of life in the way that we live it here. Every single life form experiences challenge. But he says life gets way easier when you can accept that it's challenging. You see, so many of us struggle with heartbreak because on some level we think that it shouldn't have happened. Right? That person shouldn't have broken my heart. We should have stayed together and lived happily ever after. Our relationship should have lasted forever. It shouldn't have happened the way that it happened. That's often our biggest struggle. I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they would leave me. I can't believe they would hurt me. I can't believe they wouldn't care about me more than they did. Life gets easier when we can accept. The final stage of grief is acceptance. Life gets easier when we can accept that pain and heartbreak and challenge is a part of it. So that heartbreak actually was supposed to happen. Some of you aren't going to want to hear that. And I understand, and I send you a lot of love. But it was all supposed to happen exactly the way that it happened. It wasn't supposed to be any different. That relationship wasn't supposed to last any longer than it did. That person wasn't supposed to be anything in your life other than what they were. They played their part perfectly, exactly the way they were supposed to create the experience in you that you were exactly supposed to have. And when you can accept that, rather than fight with it and argue with it and resist it, you find a deeper place within yourself. And, like, this isn't even spiritual or woo woo or anything like that. Like a psychologist will tell you, in order to create a secure relationship, you need to be secure, right? When we are insecure in relationships, meaning when we're anxious or avoidant or disorganized, we create insecure relationships. You could meet the most secure person in the world, you'll still be insecure and you'll drive them away. So this just very logically translates. Your ability to deeply experience your heartbreak deepens your capacity to create secure love. It deepens your capacity to create secure love. The greater the ability you have to feel everything, right? To face that fear, as I was saying earlier, those shame ideas of I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'm not likable, I'm not wanted, I don't matter, right? Which is our deepest fear, right? Every human being, our deepest fear is that those things are actually true about us. And it's only in our willingness to truly face those things that we realize they're not true. As long as we spend our lives tiptoeing around them and trying to control them and trying to make sure nothing ever touches me in a way that brings that up, I never really experience it. I never really transcend it. So again, I want to come back to, for anyone who's experiencing heartbreak right now, for anyone who's going through a loss or you're going through grief right now, I just want to say that I'm not trying to minimize the experience. I'm not trying to take away the validity of the experience. It's real. But if you could just open yourself up as you go through this, that it wasn't supposed to happen any other way. Nothing has gone wrong here. And this person has given you an opportunity to go to places within yourself that you wouldn't have gone if they had just kept validating you and giving you the attention and whatever it was you needed from them. And yes, it hurts right now. And I get that it hurts right now. And maybe that person was cruel and insensitive. And maybe I'll admit, like, you probably did deserve better treatment than they gave you in many circumstances. I'm not going to argue that. But no matter what happened or how it happened or why it happened, the gift that they have given you is the opportunity to experience something inside yourself that you would not have experienced had they been any different. And your ability to be with that is allowing you to become more secure in who you are. And as you become more secure in who you are, you develop a greater capacity to create more secure, healthier love in the future. And you create a resilience for when you don't get what you want. You're no longer so afraid of it anymore. All right, so that's what I want to leave you with today. This has been a powerful conversation, and your ability to really receive the experience of heartbreak, of loss, of your ability to truly grieve is what makes you more secure, is what leads to better results in love and life in the future. Okay, so I want to open up for questions. I'm going to scroll back through here and read through some of the comments and things that people have dropped in. If you have a question, go ahead, drop your question in the chat. I will answer as many as I can. So this question comes from Shelly. She's asking, I was secure before my relationship and more insecure after. How would you explain this dynamic? And I know that can be a little confusing, especially with what I've been saying today. You go through heartbreak and you're supposed to become more secure as a result of it. And yet you were secure before and feel less secure after. And I think grief or loss or heartbreak is inherently a little bit of an insecure experience. So when I talk about becoming more secure in the long run, yeah, you will as you process and as you work through it in a healthy way. But in the short term, when you're heartbroken, it is essentially an insecure experience. If you remember what I was talking about earlier, or you may or may not have been with me, but I was talking about how like a part of you is dying, right? Like the identity that was attached to that relationship and like the identity of yourself in relationship with this other person, that is dying when you're grieving. And so as that is dying, there's a part of you that is dying with that, and that inherently feels insecure. Again, it brings up this question of like, who am I? Right? It's like a reorienting of your whole identity and your whole relationship with life and others and yourself and the world. And it's like a figuring out like, who am I again? There's a reinventing yourself. And so that can feel and does feel very insecure because so much of who you knew yourself to be is no longer there. So much of what you knew your life to be is no longer there. You're reorienting all of this. You're developing a new relationship with it and a new awareness. So I say all of this to say that, yes, after your relationship, you will probably feel insecure for a while, especially if that relationship like really touched you in a deep way. You are going to feel that pain. You are going to be grieving that loss. But it's in your ability to open yourself to the experience. It's in your ability to sit with the confusion, the discomfort, right? Like, because that experience feels insecure is one of the reasons that we try to escape it so quickly. I said earlier that we're like, oh, why am I still hung up on this person? They were an asshole. Why am I even thinking about them, right? Well, you're thinking about them because they touched your heart. You're thinking about them because you were vulnerable in that relationship. It's normal to think about them. It's normal to pain that loss. It's normal to grieve that. It's normal to feel all of that. And your ability to really sit with that is what has you become more secure, right? It's like when you feel insecure and then you try to escape the insecurity, that insecurity is always like on your back and it's like chasing you around. But when you feel insecure and you lean into it, you surrender into it, and you develop the ability to really sit with it and be with it and hold that insecure experience, that is what creates security. It's the very act of sitting with and holding the insecure experience, not needing to run or repress or avoid it. That creates security. So beautiful question, Shelly. And I want to say, like, yeah, you're going to go through a period of reorienting yourself. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel insecure. And the growth and the challenge here is to not try to escape or avoid it, but to really lean into it, learn to hold and be with that experience. That's the thing to do with it. So much love to you. Thank you for the question. I really appreciate that. And I hope that supports you. I want to take this next question from Michelle Jarrett. She says, where I get tripped up is that it seems I need to really acknowledge the wrongdoing of the other person in order to gather the strength to actually move on from them. And I think that is important, right? And we don't want to like paint them out to be a saint if they weren't a saint, right? We don't want to paint them out to be this amazing person. Like, I mean, who would want to leave an amazing person, right? Who would want to let go of an amazing person? And sometimes we have to, right? If it's just not compatible or they don't want the same things we do, sometimes we do have to actually let go of an amazing person. But let's say you're in a situation where it wasn't an amazing person and you need to actually acknowledge, like, no, they didn't treat me right. They didn't honor me. They didn't appreciate me. They didn't respect me. They didn't give me the love that I deserve and the presence that I deserve. Well, there are two ways of doing that. you can do that while demonizing the other person. And when you demonize somebody, there's like a secret payoff that you get from that, right? It's like you need to make yourself feel better by tearing them down. And that is a way of like reinforcing your own wounding. So I think the healthier way to do that is to acknowledge that, it's not that they're a bad person. It's not that they're evil. It's not any of that. You don't need to demonize them as a human being. But what you do is you can recognize that, yeah, like maybe there's some wounding, like you even have compassion for that person. As you look at them and you say, you know what? I can see that they weren't available for the quality of love that I am seeking in my life. And I can see that they weren't available for that because I can see, like, maybe you know their story, maybe you know what they've been through, or maybe you don't know their whole story, but maybe you can just see their avoidance, or you can see their kind of manipulative games or struggles or however they approach things. And so as you can recognize that, you can say, well, they're not a bad person, but they're a wounded person. And I actually have, love and compassion for them to a degree because I can see what they've been through. I can see why they are the way they are. I can see that they're not available for love. And I can see that in them hurting me, they're actually just making me feel the way they feel. And I can actually say to myself, you know what? I know that I'm going to heal from this and I'm going to be better because of it. And I'm grieving this right now, but this is a temporary experience that's going to pass in my life. But I can see that for them, this is not a temporary experience. They're going to keep creating this over and over and over again in relationships. You know what? I'm going to heal. I'm going to get better. Like I'm going to find a healthy relationship and I'm going to be happy in my life. But they might never. And that's how you can actually have love and compassion for that person while also acknowledging the incompatibility and saying, no, I deserve better than this. I shouldn't have to deal with this kind of avoidance or waiting 3 days for a call or text back or, having them make promises and break them or whatever was showing up there. Right? I deserve more than that. And I'm going to expect more than that in my life. But I can also understand where they are and why they are in that place. And rather than extending them hate and resentment, I can extend them some love and some understanding and some compassion. It doesn't mean I'm going to tolerate that behavior in the future. It just means that as I move forward, I don't have to bring hate and resentment with me. So I hope that supports you, Michelle. That's a beautiful question. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to take this question from Yuri. Yuri says, it is my understanding that anxious attachment can be minimized but not changed completely. So it's my understanding that anxious attachment can be minimized but not changed completely. And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I wouldn't say that's not true. But I think I don't think we should ever put ourselves in a box of saying we are any one thing. Oh, I'm an anxious attachment. I'm an avoidant attachment. I don't think we should put ourselves in a box because it's not an either or. It's like a spectrum. And I always think about it like this, if you imagine like a balance point, a secure attachment would be at the balance point. And then anxious would be on one extreme, avoidant would be on another extreme. And then if you imagine disorganized as kind of bouncing back and forth between the extremes, right? That's how I picture it in my mind. And so, would anxious attachment, look, I've seen people who are anxiously attached end up becoming more avoidant. And I've seen people who are avoidantly attached becoming more anxious. And so that's like crossing all the way over, right? So it's about not putting ourselves in a box and saying we are any one thing. You're not an anxiously attached person. You are a person who has experienced anxious attachment, right? You're not an avoidant. You're a human being who has experienced avoidant tendencies. And the more we come into balance, the more our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior starts to be more secure. We start to show up to relationships in a more secure way. Does that mean you'll never feel anxious ever again? No, you might sometimes feel anxious, but sometimes when you feel anxious, you might respond to those anxious feelings in a more secure way. Doesn't mean you'll never feel avoidant feelings, but sometimes when you feel avoidant feelings, you might feel them in a more secure way. If you've been anxious your whole life and you start to become more secure, you might notice that you develop some avoidant tendencies because all of a sudden you're recognizing a lot of patterns that you didn't recognize before, and you're being a little more careful about how quickly and easily you engage with people. And so you might have some avoidant tendencies. But again, it's not that like you're not putting yourself in a box and saying, I am an avoidant, I am anxious. What you're recognizing is you are a dynamic, evolving human being who is having certain experiences. Now, I think it's unreasonable for any of us to expect that we're going to feel 100% secure all the time. And you might, like, it's possible. I mean, we might say that's in the realm of becoming enlightened. But, most of us, it's not that we're going to feel 100% secure in every experience all the time. But as our ability to accept our experience becomes more second nature and more natural, as there's less kind of fighting and resisting our own experience and arguing and trying to control it and trying to skew it to make it not feel such a way or whatever. As we become more able to recognize our experience, to fully accept our experience, the experience doesn't have so much resistance. It kind of moves through us more naturally and effortlessly and quickly. We could say that, yeah, you're not so anxiously attached anymore. You have a more secure way of relating with life. And so, I think there are a lot of schools of thought about these things, and not all of them are particularly helpful. Any school of thought that puts you in a box and tells you what you are and tells you that you're always going to be that way, I don't find that to be particularly helpful, because you're a dynamic, evolving being. And as you learn and grow, there's really no limit to how much you could learn, how much you could grow, how much your experience of life and yourself and relationships could change. So rather than identifying as one or the other or anything in particular, how about you just be present to what you're experiencing right now? Oh, I feel a little anxious right now. Oh, I feel a little avoidant right now. Right? I'm not defining, I spoke about this earlier, right? You are defining your experience. You are not becoming defined by your experience. So if you feel anxious right now, okay, you feel anxious right now. Deal with that experience in the present moment. Maybe you'll feel anxious again tomorrow. Maybe you'll feel something else tomorrow. But a narrative that defines you as a certain thing, as a fixed reality without any potential or possibility, is inherently a limiting belief about yourself. And the more we release our beliefs about ourselves, the more possibility and expansion becomes available. The less we define ourselves in any specific way, the more we open ourselves up for a whole range of experiences. So I hope that supports you. It's a great question. And yeah, I think there's not really a limit on how much we can grow and expand. But the more we define ourselves by our limitations, the more we create artificial limits. So beautiful question, Yuri. Thank you for that. Thank you. It's a beautiful question. Okay, this question is from Black Caribbean Femininity. She asks, Would you say that breakups are harder for men because of the saying that women give men purpose? Um, I wouldn't say that. I think breakups are hard for everybody, and sometimes they're not hard for certain people. So it's you can't say that it's always one way for women and always another way for men. Um, I think it depends on the level of attachment. Sometimes men are very detached from a relationship and the breakup is very easy for them. Sometimes women are very detached from a relationship and the breakup is very easy from them. Right. So it depends on the nuance of the individuals and, really the level of attachment the person had to the relationship. Sometimes there's a woman who's been in a relationship with a man for 20 years and she spent the last 10 years pulling away from the relationship while he's been blissfully unaware that anything was wrong. And she leaves him and she's already grieved the relationship and she's ready to move on. And his whole world comes crashing down because he didn't even see it coming. And sometimes, there's a man who's not really taking the woman seriously and she's really deeply attached to the relationship and he tosses her aside like it was no big deal and it rocks her entire world. So I think all different relationships have all different nuances. You can't say that it's always one way for men or always one way for women. In terms of women giving men purpose, I think relationships give us both purpose, and maybe that shows up one way for men and that shows up another way for women. Right. But, you were just talking about, wanting to have a partner and a family and children. Right. So in that sense, a relationship might give you purpose. So I think relationships give us purpose because our lives become bigger when we're in relationship with someone than when we're on our own. Right. When we're on our own, our lives can have less purpose unless we have another kind of relationship. Like a career is a kind of relationship, right? When you're doing something in the world that other people are a part of and you have responsibility in that, that gives you a sense of purpose, right? But if you're a single person, you're not in a committed relationship, you don't have kids, you don't have a job or a career that's deeply meaningful to you, then your life could lack purpose. Or there are other ways to find purpose too, friendships, hobbies, things like that. But, your life could lack purpose. But then if you develop a career that's deeply meaningful to you, if you develop a long-term partnership, if you have children, if you have deep friendships, right? We find purpose in relationship because it's when our life is bigger than just ourselves that it becomes purposeful. And that's just as true for women as it is for men. So to answer your question, I don't think it's just one way for men or just one way for women. I think it's very individual. It depends on the individuals involved. It depends on the nuance of the relationship. It depends on so many factors. But whether you're a man or woman, if you were deeply attached to a relationship and you lose it, that's a painful experience. Doesn't matter who you are. So thanks for the question. Beautiful question. Thank you. I want to take this question from Kathy. How does one manage a situation where you are in a situationship with someone who is still a business partner? How does one heal through that, especially if the other person still wants to be in your life? Yeah, that's complex and that's tough. 100%. Very complex, very tough. I think sometimes, if it's a business partnership or like my wife, for example, she worked with her ex-husband and still does. So her ex-husband is the general manager in her company, and they've been broken up now for, I don't know, like 12, 15 years, something like that. But they've been working together the whole time. And in the beginning, like it was really hard. And, she could probably tell you more about it than I could. But in the beginning, it was like, and I won't just say for her, I'll just say for anybody, is like, you've got to have really clear boundaries. So it might look like if you need to have a meeting with them, you have a really clear boundary that like, we're having the meeting is just about business. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk about what needs to be talked about. We're not going to draw it out. We're not going to, make it bigger than it needs to be. And maybe when the meeting's over, you like cry after they leave. And maybe you do that for a while. So there are situations where Just because you've broken up with the person doesn't mean you have to stop seeing or relating with them. I'd say whenever possible, a clean break is better. And a lot of people say, well, let's be friends. Let's help each other through the breakup. Like, usually that's just a misguided way of avoiding the inevitable. Usually in all situations, a clean break is better whenever possible. But when it's not possible, that's when you create clear boundaries. You stick to those boundaries. You might have to just pull it together while you're meeting with them to discuss whatever needs to be discussed. And then they leave the room and you fall apart. And maybe that's just how it's going to be for a while. It definitely complicates the situation. But the principles are still the same, right? The principles are still the same. So yeah, that's hard. Like it adds a layer of complexity. It makes it a little more difficult to navigate. But again, the principles are still the same. And you create boundaries and you honor those boundaries. You feel what you need to feel around it. You process the emotion around it. Having a coach or a therapist or someone who can help guide the experience for you is important. It's definitely important. So lots of love, blessings. If you're going through that right now, that's really tough. And it definitely is more complex than if you were just going through it with a clean break. Because, not only are you going through the process of grieving, but you're going through that process with that person showing up in your life and reactivating all those things all the time. So lots of love. Thank you for the question, Kathy, and sending you love as you navigate that. So much love to all of you. And thank you for being with me today. Wherever you are, whatever you're going through, again, if you are navigating a heartbreak right now, I just want to send you so much love and say that's, as I've said today, it's a season of our lives that is just so challenging and so difficult. And I don't want anything I've said today to minimize or, invalidate that experience. But what I want to offer you is a healthy and powerful way to move through that experience. And while you're going to go through a period of uncertainty and insecurity, and you're going to be navigating some heavy emotions, it is absolutely possible to, on the other side of this, be more secure, more fulfilled, and better than you have ever been before in your life, and attract better in relationships as a result. So if you just recently tuned in, make sure to catch the full episode on the Conscious Love Show podcast. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Again, wherever you find podcasts, you'll find us there. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'll see you back here next week. Lots of love and blessings, everybody. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again next week. Take care. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @TheLivingRelationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.